Hello, my name is Tracey Allen and I'm author of Easy Gluten-free Lunches and Snacks Simple Cookbook. And what I'm going to show you today is how to make a simple bread recipe. It's the only bread recipe in my cookbook and it's really simple. Anyway, we're going to start. The recipe's in the book, but I'll give you some of the information as we go along. I've got 2 cups of the gluten-free flour mix that I use in here. I've got 4 cups. I've doubled the recipe. So 2 cups of flour is in the normal bread recipe if you're just making 1 loaf. But I've used 4. So we start off with the dried ingredients. And I'm just going to pick up my salt here. So we're going to put in some salt. About a half a teaspoon per recipe is good. And that's about right. I mean, if you want to be more precise in your measurement, you can. We use xanthan gum because that's what acts like your gluten, kind of makes that textury part of it. And we use 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum for each cup of gluten-free flour. That's the mix that's worked well for me anyway. So I've got 4 cups of flour in here, which is a double recipe. So I'm putting in 4 teaspoons of xanthan gum. Xanthan gum, we've got the salt. The other thing that I've discovered is really good to add to the texture of the bread is almond meal. I actually just buy almonds in bulk and grind my own almond meal, but you can buy it in a bag at the store. So 3 tablespoons of almond meal per loaf, per loaf. I've got a double recipe in here, so I'm doing 6. Okay, and that's all the dry ingredients that we have. Now for the wet ingredients, you want yeast, which is typical to any bread recipe that you have, and it's 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast per recipe. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 1/2 because I've got a double batch. Oops. So I'm putting the yeast in a bowl, and then I'm going to add just a smidge of sugar. It's a 1/2 teaspoon of sugar per batch, so I'm putting in 1 teaspoon of sugar, and it's 1 cup of flour per batch. Since again I'm doing a double batch, I do 2 cups of lukewarm water. And normally we'll let that rise so it gets a little bubbly. In the meantime, I'm going to mix up my dry ingredients and add a few more wet ingredients into the center. So I've got this, and what I tend to do is I make a hole in the center of the bowl. I don't know if you can see this, but I've got a bit of a hole in the center here. And that's where I'm going to start putting my wet ingredients. So we'll start with olive oil. And I use 3 tablespoons of olive oil per batch. So that's 1, 2, 3. And since I'm doing a double batch, I'll add 3 more to make 6. Then I've got cider vinegar. I think you can use regular vinegar too, but I tend to have cider vinegar, so I tend to use that. It's a 1/2 teaspoon per loaf, and again I'm doing a double batch, so it'll be 1 full teaspoon that I'll add into that. And my understanding is that the vinegar helps to make the bread last a little longer. Although honestly, it's so good you're going to probably consume it within a day or 2. If it's anything over 2 days, you really want to, slice it and freeze it, and it does freeze rather well. So keep that in mind. The next thing I've got is eggs, and it's 2 eggs per loaf. And again, we're doing double batch, so we'll do 4 eggs. So if you can, I don't know if you can see it or not, but I've got them kind of in the center. I don't want to have them scoop out too much, but it's all in the center there. So we've got the eggs, the cider vinegar, the oil. If you'd like to add some honey, you can. I don't find I need it, so I'm not going to add it here, but it is listed as an ingredient in the recipe book, so feel free to use it if you like. Now my yeast is starting to bubble a bit, which is great, but I'm not quite ready to add it yet. Now one loaf would be this loaf pan, and you see that I've greased it. This is a non-stick pan. You probably don't have to grease it, but I tend to grease it just to make sure that the loaf comes out quite easily. Now, the other thing that I found with this particular recipe is, I don't know if you found it, but the hamburger buns are extremely expensive if they're gluten-free and you're buying them in the store. So I came up with the idea of creating my own hamburger buns. And what I use are these little pot pie containers. So these pot pie containers are, well, you can get them at a local dollar store, 8 for $1 or whatever. They're relatively cheap, and I reuse them quite a bit, so they're not really costly. And what I tend to do is one batch makes roughly 4 of these. So you can make 4 hamburger buns or 1 loaf of bread. And I tend to double my recipe at once, and I make 4 buns and 1 loaf of bread all in one sitting. That's what I like. I mean, you do whatever you like. If you want to make a single batch at a time and just make it as you need it, or if you want to make them and freeze them, that works too. Whatever way you like and works for you. So we've got the yeast coming on right now, and you can see it kind of frothy, and that's what you want. You want it kind of bubbling and whatnot. So I've got a bit of froth, so I'm going to add it into the rest of the ingredients. I'll move my stuff over here. Okay, so I'm just going to mix this up. And the difference with gluten-free flour to regular flour, and I used to make my own homemade bread many years ago, you know, when you knead it and the whole bit. And the difference here is you don't need gluten-free flour because the batter tends to be more moist, and you're not adding flour and getting the kind of knead part into it. So really, once you've mixed it up in the bowl here, and I'll show you what it looks like when I've finished, you're ready to pour it into the pans. So it's actually simpler to make gluten-free bread than regular bread. So you can see there that it's quite a wet dough, but it is kind of clumping and it's got a bit of texture to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill 4 of these to make my buns. Just looking for my spatula. 4 of these to make buns, and then I'll put the rest into the loaf. So here's the first one there. I'm going to show you. And so you fill it about halfway full, and I just smooth it on the edge with the spoon so that it just makes it look neater. And then I'm going to take this bread pan and fill it. I like a nice high loaf, so I'm going to fill it a little bit more than half, so it'll be almost like 3/4. And I'll smooth it out as well. I'm not being too neat here. So you can see that in the loaf pan there. So it's about almost 3/4, between 1/2 and 3/4. And then this one's for the hamburger bun. So I'm gonna finish doing this up, and then I'm gonna let it rest for an hour. So that's when the bread rises. So basically you just mix it up, you put it in your containers, you let it rise for an hour, then we'll put it in the oven at 400 for 10 minutes, and if it seems like it's burning over the top, I put some foil over it. If not, I let it go. You go pretty much an hour for the loaf of bread, and I do about 30 minutes for the hamburger buns. And it's that simple. And it's a nice loaf of gluten-free bread, and it's done easy. And when I finish cooking it, I'll add on either to this video or a separate video and show you the texture and the look of the bread that when it's cooked. So you'll see how delicious it is, and you'll want to make it. Thanks. Hope you've enjoyed and this is helpful for you, and you'll look at my book and maybe some of the other recipes in it.